Hey everyone, welcome back to Big Strong Book. I'm Reed, and today we are going to be discussing King's Dragon by Kate Elliott, the first book in her Crown of Stars series. So this book, King's Dragon, is the first of 7 published novels within the Crown of Stars series. I own all of these, got them for real cheap off of eBay a while back, but I'm now just starting to read it. I had heard this series compared in scope to A Song of Ice and Fire, maybe not quite as ambitious as that, but with similar elements. So you have a kingdom that is embroiled with internal conflict. You have threats from the outside that are coming in, and you have this undercurrent of supernatural creatures that are starting to come to the fore. And within that, you have characters caught between all of those major elements. I've seen mixed things about this series, particularly as it progresses book by book. Again, as I mentioned, this is 7 books long. Each book is 600 plus pages, so it's a big, fat, epic fantasy series. And I'll just start right off by saying that I really enjoyed this book. It was a very solid start. And I'll just say this now before I dive into more, while enjoying it, I find it interesting that pretty much all the main plot points, notice I say plot points and not character points. Like with the characters, they're just beginning their journeys. But in terms of the big conflicts and the plots, almost all of them are wrapped up by the end of this book, which I found interesting, except one major plot conflict that will assuredly be picked up within the second book. So, a little bit about what King's Dragon is about. So, King's Dragon takes place in this kingdom of Wendar and Vare, almost like a twin kingdom, 2 big lands, plus a variety of smaller like states and territories that are all under King Henry. And King Henry is ruling, but the perceived legitimacy of his rule is starting to wane a little bit. He has an older half-sister named Sabella, who is starting to garner support from dukes, from other great lords and ladies of the land, to try to put forward her claim to the throne. So the interesting way is how kings within this world pass down their power. So often in both historical settings within our own world, as well as many other fantasy series, the rule of a land or the rule of a kingdom passes from usually a male king to the firstborn male heir. In this world of Crown of Stars, it is a little bit different. So the ruling monarch may be a king or a queen, and then their firstborn child, not their firstborn son, firstborn daughter, just their firstborn child, goes on what is called the heir's progress. So they go on a progress of the land, kind of beginning to take on more regal and leadership duties. But their goal within the heir's progress is to either get someone pregnant if it's a male heir, or become pregnant if it's a female heir. This way, that heir can be made legitimate because the line is guaranteed to continue. If an heir goes out on their progress and doesn't get pregnant or get somebody pregnant, then the heir's progress passes on to the next child. So then the next child is up. So each child gets a chance. And so the child, essentially the first child that is successful in this endeavor, becomes the heir. So one of the big geopolitical conflict of this book is, again, Sabella and her brother, who is king. Sabella went out on her heir's progress and didn't initially become pregnant. Eventually she did have a child. She did, marry a duke, but that not before her half-brother was elevated in her stead, and he made his heir's progress, and under suspicious circumstances and quasi-supernatural circumstances, which is discussed within, that is the scene of the prologue of this book, and it isn't a secret either. He essentially has a half-human child with a woman who is a member of a race known as the Aoi, or the Lost Ones. They're kind of like this old, ancient, elven, immortal race. And so he has essentially a bastard son, but that was enough to kind of legitimize his claim to the throne, so he becomes king. So that is the big geopolitical conflict. However, we really don't get, we get to see the king in action through some character POV points within this book, but not for a while, not until we're about halfway through. Most of this book follows the perspectives of two ordinary people, and they're both about the same age. They're both 17-ish years old. We have a character called Elaine, and Elaine is, again, a 17-year-old who is going to be entering into the church, the Dacian church. I should note here, one of the main criticisms about this series is that the main religion within this world, which is a very pervasive religion, is clearly modeled after Christianity, where all the big things, the core beliefs and tenets of Christianity are just kind of one-for-one copy pasted over with new names. So instead of Jesus, their main kind of church figure is Dason or Dyson, and the whole thing, when they mention that he died for our sins, a lot of that is similar to the tenets of Christianity. They have a leader called the Scopos, which is, again, a one-for-one version of our Pope, the Roman Catholic, our world's Pope, the Roman Catholic Pope. There are deacons. There are, instead of bishop, they're called bishops, and the bishops can be male or female within this world. There's no kind of gender segregation within the roles of the clergy. Deacons can be men or women. There are fraters, kind of like friars or monks. I believe all the fraters are men. That is the only part of it that might be kind of gender segregated. But so Elaine is set to enter the church. He's set to enter into a monastery. And his lineage isn't clear. He knows that he is essentially an adopted foster child, and he's from a dubious origin. And he begins to think of who his real parents might be. Other people around him essentially tell him their theories about who they think his parents are. So he's about to enter this monastery when a tragedy happens. And I'll say this because this happens within the first chapter. It's not even really a spoiler. The monastery is attacked and destroyed by these species. They're kind of like humans, but not quite humans. It's a species called the Aika, or the Ica, E-I-K-A. So I think probably Ica is the better term, so I'll call them Ica. So they have some hard shell, tusked exteriors, but they're kind of human, but not really. So, but they conduct raids all along the coast of Wendar and Vare, and they attack this monastery while Elaine is on his way to the monastery, and he gets a vision from a figure called the Lady of Battles, and the Lord and Lady are like the gods, the main believed in gods of this world. And the Lady of Battles gives him a rose, and makes him pledge his service to her. And then she kind of goes away, and she leads him to safety and protects his village, his kind of adopted foster family that he grew up around. And eventually he enters into the service of the local Count Lavestine. Lavestine is an interesting character with this whole pack of hounds that he has with him, and these hounds are, vicious dogs that seem to take a liking to Elaine, and there are some theories that the characters, as well as Elaine, have about why they chose him. But as Elaine begins his journey, he comes across some political figures that seem to be using sorcery as a means to an end, specifically to help Lady Sabella in her brewing civil war against King Henry. And he really has almost crises of faith, which is interesting, and he comes into his own in terms of seeing the cruelty of the world. And there's another character also who she sees the cruelty of the world in a very, very brutal way. And that character, the other main focal point of the story, is a character named Liath. Liath has been on the run for a while, along with her father. And her father has been teaching her essentially the ways of thinking to potentially pursue magical pursuits in sorcery, and he has all these like magical texts with him. But again, something tragic happens to him. I'll say it here because it's in her first POV chapter. Her father dies, and she enters into this. She becomes the slave of a local frater or a local priest, who of course treats her horribly, assaults her, and so forth, does terrible things to her, and he is one who wants to pursue the ends to sorcery. And eventually her path leads her on to many other interesting places. Her storyline is quite interesting, and she has a very profound arc even within this story by the end of it. And I don't want to get into too many details about that beyond what I just said. But again, so there are two big conflicts. There's the civil war that's brewing and eventually comes to a head within this book. And then raids from this, civilization known as the Ica. And what's interesting about this book, and not what I was expecting, because of course, this is 7 volumes long. So one would expect with any fantasy series that things are going to roll one into the next, into the next, into the next. Like that there's going to be maybe a bit of a cliffhanger ending, and there is kind of with the way that the epilogue ends. But which actually did surprise me. I did not expect all that to happen in the epilogue. But for the most part, as I mentioned before, and I won't say which plot lines because that would get too much into spoilers. But within this book, almost every major plot line is concluded. I won't say 100% wrapped up, and Kate Elliott as the author, she's gonna move on. It's like a lot of these situations have a temporary band-aid placed over them, obviously with the tension that is still in the air amidst a lot of these characters and a lot of these interest groups, I'll just call them. It's clear that these tensions will probably boil over. As I said, a temporary band-aid of a solution is placed over these conflicts by one character in particular who kind of, within his own power, tries to wrap everything up. And it's interesting because I was reading it, and as I was getting to the end, I'm like, oh, pretty much everything is going to be wrapped up in this book, except for one big plot line, which every major group and character they're kind of directing their focus to, and it's clear based on just leading into the second book as well as the back cover synopsis of the second book. That's what the main focus of the second book, Prince of Dogs, will be. So it'll be interesting not only to see if the one big outstanding plot line from this book gets solved, or a temporary band-aid placed over it in book 2, or if that's going to continue, or if that's going to continue, but we're also going to see maybe a lot of the things that seemed to be concluded within this kind of breaking out again, or that other conflicts might start to erupt. That very well might happen, because again, this series is like 600 to 900 page books long. Like, this series is nowhere near finished, at least from this perspective. It is finished in terms of a published perspective, but yeah, it'll be interesting. I will go. I'm not sure if immediately, today or tomorrow or whatever, I'm gonna start reading book 2, just because I don't feel absolutely 100% compelled to pick up the next book. I did enjoy this, as I mentioned. I did really enjoy this. It's just because so much was wrapped up in this, I'm still very curious to see where the story is going, mainly because almost every other plot line, it seems, has been wrapped up besides character development. These characters are far from reaching kind of the pinnacle of their arcs. That much is clear. But again, it's a very interesting thing. It's almost like Malazan, but even Malazan had a lot more. I think of the end of Gardens of the Moon, where that pretty much wraps up, but there are a few storylines. So the series may be like Malazan, where, especially in the earlier ones, where pretty much every main conflict is wrapped up in each book. But then as we get closer to the end, then it's one book leads directly into the other, leads directly into the other. But yeah, so I guess the big positive with this, if you're looking for something that is almost standalone, yeah, this book is almost standalone, but there are enough outstanding conflicts to the point where you do want to see what happens. You do want to see where this goes, because the mysteries of this world haven't fully been explored yet. So that'll be interesting to see with book 2, Prince of Dogs, as well as other books in this series as well. I'm not going to get into spoilers with this. I might with any future books of this series that I choose to read. But for now, no spoilers. So, King's Dragon by Kate Elliott. I also have to say, some people online, from what I've read, hate these covers. Pretty much every book in the series has a very colorful and brash, dare I say, cover design. I love these covers. These just drawn and illustrated covers I love much better than any Photoshop cover we get these days. So yeah, I love this cover. So anyways, King's Dragon by Kate Elliott. If you've read it, let me know what you think. If your views of this book kind of align with mine, where you are a little bit curious to see where it's going, or if not, or if this series is one that kind of wraps up with each book along the way, or it starts to kind of become more blended together as books continue. So let me know what you guys think of this book, and I will see you guys next time.